Well, the U.S. Open is just around the corner where many eyes will be on a potential round three of a blockbuster rivalry that's formed between Jannik Sinner and, of course, Carlos Alcaraz. Throw into the mix that on the women's side of the game, there's a potential for a seventh different winner in 7 editions of the tournament and a brand new mixed doubles tournament that sees some of the biggest names in the sport team up, and there's a lot to talk about. So with that, we welcome broadcaster and author Ben Rothenberg to this sporting planet to discuss it all. Ben, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Todd.
Perfect. Hey, can we start with the U.S. Open as an event? What makes it so unique compared to the other Grand Slams that you've covered?
Yeah, I think each of the Grand Slam events in pretty clear ways reflects some of the culture around it and the city around it. And New York is the location for the U.S. Open, and New York is reflected in a lot of the U.S. Open. It's loud, it's unapologetic, it's commercial, it's not subtle about anything. It's very in your face. It's concrete everywhere. And it's also a fun time. The energy there is unmatched at the other 3 Grand Slams, I should say. And it's just a very sort of in-your-face, frank, no pretense anywhere at the U.S. Open. What you see is what you get with the U.S. Open, and a lot of players and fans can really enjoy that. Others are definitely shocked and taken aback by it the first time they're there. But I think the champions and the ones who thrive in New York really are ones who can get on that same kind of New York wavelength with the event.
Yeah, it definitely has a New York City flavor. Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz have already played out 2 incredible finals and Grand Slams this year. Do you think we'll see another one in New York City?
I think it's very likely. I think that the way those 2 guys have separated themselves from the field is pretty clear, and the level they achieve and that they show off in their finals against each other, I think really shows just how distant they've gotten from the pack. I mean, especially in Paris at the French Open, the level those 2 played was just so far beyond what anyone else in men's tennis right now seems even close to being capable of right now. Really, the closest threat to that duopoly probably is Novak Djokovic, and he's 38 years old and probably doesn't have the same capability of getting onto that level for a full best of 5 match the way it would take to knock off one of those guys en route to the final. And so they seem like the guys, and obviously things can happen, and Alcaraz especially has been more up and down a lot of times in his early round matches, but I think that Sinner should be pretty much a lock if healthy to get back to another U.S. Open final, and Alcaraz a clear favorite on his bottom half of the draw as well to meet him there. And it'd be pretty cool to get a third straight meeting, a pretty cool continuity for that rivalry if they can really, without a doubt, even further consolidate in their spot at the top of the game.
This sounds like a question I should ask at the very end, but who do you think emerges victorious if they do meet again in the final?
I think Sinner's actually been markedly better in a few subtle ways than Alcaraz in this rivalry. Obviously, Sinner had 3, I think, championship points in Paris, so he was already 1 point away from sweeping those 2, and I think he was decisively the better player in the Wimbledon final as well when push came to shove. And he's just been, steadier. I think Alcaraz has kind of had a few adventures in early rounds, letting a bunch of players who you wouldn't really think would be able to challenge him or threaten him get a set or even 2 against him on the way. And Sinner has been much more methodical. Sinner obviously is also the better player in hard courts historically. He's won the last 3 now hardcourt major titles in a row, 2 Australian Opens and last year's U.S. Open. So I think the conditions and kind of momentum and current form, I would have to lean Sinner pretty clearly. But it's still close. I mean, obviously Alcaraz not a shock if he can win it either.
True. You brought up Novak. Is this his last chance to win a 25th Grand Slam? And do you think if he does get that magic 25th, do you think it's going to have to come on a hard court surface?
Yeah, I think people are saying that Wimbledon even too, that Wimbledon, because he's won so much there, and the faster services definitely would help an older player, you would think. And so Wimbledon was a good chance for him, but he just picked up an injury again along the way, right near the end of that quarterfinal before his semifinal against Sinner, and left him not all that competitive against Sinner in that semi. Who knows how much more competitive he would have been if relatively in full fighting health. But it's just tough, I think, for any 38-year-old, especially someone who plays a pretty physical level of tennis and style of tennis that Novak Djokovic played at his peak, to be able to sustain that over 7 best-of-5 matches. I think it's a really tough task in this era of men's tennis where things have gotten so physical, so athletically demanding, so dynamic, so taxing. And it's amazing that Djokovic held up as well as he did for so long. I mean, he won 3 majors in 2023, just a couple years ago, which is incredible. I think even more so in hindsight now that you see age finally catching up to him. And so, it's going to be tough for him for sure. But I do think that he would probably be a favorite, or at least given at least a 50-50 shot against anybody in the draw except for Sinner and Alcaraz. And then, that means maybe if there are some upsets that Djokovic is well positioned to take advantage of those. And he's been steady at the Grand Slams. He's made 3 semifinals this year so far. So not a bad year by almost anyone else's standards, but not at Djokovic's normal golden greatest of all time type clip.
And you would know this because you live on the East Coast. The weather in the upper East Coast area, New England, New York City, New Jersey area can be so brutal this time of year. You can get the thunderstorms, you can get that oppressive humidity, and you factor that in with a hard court surface, your body takes a beating.
It really does. Yeah, that hard court, that sort of concrete type surface can radiate a lot of the heat and make it even hotter. It can just sort of be a stove on which the players feel like they're cooking a lot of times when the heat really gets in there. So yeah, it definitely can be one of the more physically challenging ones. The Australian Open has its moments as well, but I think New York, in that humidity, I think can be maybe even more reliably each year. Has a couple really brutal days, and yeah, it's something that all the players who want to succeed there will have to deal with at some point. And most of the top players have been sort of battle tested through that. I know Sinner actually had a one match in Australia this year where he was really struggling in his middle of the tournament against Holger Rune and narrowly escaped that just when he looked like he was really wilting in the heat. But yeah, it's one of the challenges and can be an equalizer. It can be something that can really disrupt an otherwise clear favorite on their path to the final or to victory.
We're really making a transition on the men's side of the game from obviously the big 3, and it's kind of like, as you said, the big 2 now. Who else should we be looking out for? What's another name that could possibly push themselves into that pantheon and make it a big 3 again? I mean, are we talking about like American Taylor Fritz possibly?
Yeah, Taylor Fritz is one of the ones in the conversation, I think, for sure. I think a few of the Americans,
Shelton,
actually.
maybe?
Ben Shelton was the next one I was going to name, too. Yeah, those 2 guys, I think, are definitely kind of on the outside looking in, but as close as anybody right now, especially at the majors. Shelton and Fritz have been pretty consistent about getting deep in them. Fritz, I think, was probably they don't give out bronze medals in tennis, but if they did, I think he would have gotten one at Wimbledon. He made the semifinals, took a set off of Alcaraz, and had a set point in the fourth set semifinal to a 5th set before Alcaraz saved it. So I think he's definitely in there, and Shelton, I think, is the one who a lot of analysts and certainly American pundits look at and see a lot of just the raw weapons and strength and speed and the 140-something mile per hour serve that he can hit and the lefty, big powerful forehand and the athleticism and see him as someone having a really big upside in the sport as well. So those are 2 guys for sure. I think Britain's Jack Draper probably also deserves mention. He made the semifinals in New York last year. He won Indian Wells, which is one of the bigger tournaments outside the majors this year as well. He's probably in that short list of people. But I do think that kind of group of guys has to prove by beating one of Sinner or Alcaraz one of these tournaments that they really do belong. I think until then, I think we're really seeing it as a 2-man club at the top right now.
Yeah, very exclusive club indeed. From that, we move to the women's side, and it's incredibly open, maybe more so than we've seen in a long time. You look at some of the names that have done well this year in Grand Slams. So as we turn the page now and start getting ready for the U.S. Open, who do you like on the women's side?
Yeah, it has been open. There's a lot of different champions in the last few years. I think really in women's tennis, a lot of ways, except for maybe French Open where Iga Swiatek has largely been dominant. But I think since Serena Williams went on leave for pregnancy and maternity leave, I think the women's game has stayed pretty wide open and a lot of times at the majors and a lot of different things have shaken out at different majors. We've had 3 different champions at the majors so far this year. Number 1, Aryna Sabalenka, pretty clear number 1 in the rankings, but hasn't won a major yet this year. She's defending champion in New York and probably would be a slight favorite at this point to defend that title, but a lot of people much closer on her heels than you would see on the women's side. So Coco Gauff probably gets mentioned quickly. She's number 2, and she has been behind Sabalenka and beating her twice in major finals in Paris this year and then also in the U.S. Open in 2023. And then Iga Swiatek, who played a really, really impressive Wimbledon. What everyone thought was her weakest surface on grass. She was pretty ruthless getting through that tournament, dropping only 1 set and dropping 0 games in the final against Amanda Anisimova, which I think really honestly was more about Swiatek just being unbeatable and unplayable rather than Anisimova being abysmal. I mean, Anisimova wasn't at her best for sure, but I mean, Swiatek was just good, and once she gets rolling, really can close out tournaments with that kind of scoreline quite a few times in her career. So she's a scary one if she gets a head of steam behind her. She's won this tournament U.S. Open once before in 2022. The fast hard court's not her most natural surface, but I think she'll be in good confidence right now and feeling good about her game and feeling good physically and everything like that. So she's certainly on the list. And then there's a couple Americans I'd probably throw in there too on the short list. Madison Keys, who won the Australian Open this year. Somewhat unexpected, but long awaited, and I think everyone thinks deserved kind of lifetime achievement award for her after a really long, strong career to break through to win one of these tournaments, and did it in really emphatic fashion, beating Swiatek in the semifinals and then Sabalenka in the final. Top two players in the game at that point, so that was a very good win for her. And then Jessie Pegula, probably to make a fifth candidate. She was the finalist last year, beat Swiatek last year en route to the final, played Sabalenka reasonably tough in a straight set loss in that final, and yeah, she's also someone in there as well. And then also, it could easily be someone outside of those five as well. I mean, we've seen some more surprising names come through on the women's side. Probably most of all, in 2021 when Emma Raducanu won this tournament as a qualifier. That was the most extreme sort of shock result we've had in tennis in a long time, I think it's fair to say. And so there's definitely possibilities. There's more upheaval in the women's game. Best of three instead of best of five gives favorites less time to escape if they get in trouble in a match. So it can be tougher, I think, for the favorites to prevail in a best of three tournament. Whereas, guys like Alcaraz have a lot of rope if they suddenly start, daydreaming or something during a match. They have time to recover, but the women really don't have that luxury. And so if they get in trouble, it can really change the draw pretty quickly.
I know you've written a biography about two-time U.S. Open champion Naomi Osaka. What stands out from her personally and the game that allowed her to win the two titles in 3 years? Where do you think she is in this whole mix?
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the better hardcourt players for sure. She's one of the maybe clearest hardcourt specialists we've ever had in tennis. She's won, the Australian Open twice and the U.S. Open twice, and then never made it even to a quarterfinal, or I think even fourth round at the other two majors. So she really has been at her best on the hardcourts. And she grew up in New York also, particularly a lot of her life in Queens and around Haitian neighborhoods there with her father's side of the family. And that's given her a lot of comfort at the U.S. Open in particular. And she won that, famous or infamous final with Serena Williams in 2018, and then won the really sort of surreal, empty bubble 2020 COVID edition of the tournament as well. So it's one of the loudest final and the quietest final both. So she's not probably a shortlist contender this year just based on results, but I think she is someone who shows that even sort of a quieter personality with the right sort of steeliness or mindset can thrive in New York too. It doesn't just have to be a place for, loud, brash personalities as well. There's some introverts who can make it through and make it anywhere in New York as well.
We're chatting with author and journalist Ben Rothenberg here on This Sporting Planet. All right, so there's a new mixed doubles tournament starting this year. Can you just explain to us what fans can expect in this?
Yeah, so the U.S. Open and the U.S. Tennis Association really completely revamped and pretty much reinvented the mixed doubles format, which often had been an afterthought held in the second week of the Grand Slam events, almost always featuring just doubles specialists who are an increasingly separate population of players who just play the doubles events and are often are not the ones people who are any kind of level of tennis fans have watched on TV or have seen ever playing singles matches. It's been kind of a separate group. And this time, to breathe new life into this mixed doubles format, and also should say there's just been a lot of energy around mixed format sports in across sports, period. If you look at the Olympics, all sorts of different sports and disciplines are inventing new mixed formats out of nothing. You have the swimming mixed relays and track mixed relays now, and I think even sports like archery or whatever are inventing ways for men and women to compete side by side. They just think it's a cool modern thing to do. And tennis has had this in its quiver for a long time. They've had mixed doubles. I mean, since the early Victorian garden party days of tennis, mixed doubles was invented and was there, and with men and women being together and both being socially and athletically accepted in the sport has been something that's a hallmark of tennis for a long time. That women's tennis didn't really have to catch up to the men or invent something to replicate what the men had. They've always been there in tennis, and so that's a cool asset of tennis. And I think it probably had been really underutilized by the Grand Slams just because they weren't getting a lot of eyeballs at all on their mixed event. So the US Open decided to make a big change, which is basing entry for the mixed doubles competition on only singles rankings instead of on doubles rankings. So basically locking out a lot of the top doubles specialists who normally populate that entire event and putting a lot of the single stars in there and also giving other incentives and encouragement for them to play. And so you're going to see a lot of big names, all names we pretty much mentioned here already, who are going to be in this mixed doubles event. Players like Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic, all entered this event as well, and a lot of the top women as well are in there now. There's still some shuffling around the entry list. We don't know quite who's going to be the final teams, but it does seem like it's going to be a pretty cool event to see these players teaming up and competing in a new format, and a lot of the familiar names. And US Open's being very clear, this is going to be their official mixed doubles title for the year. It's going to be a real Grand Slam event and should have the clout that has. There's also way more prize money. It's also part of the reason I'm sure that a lot of these players are showing up for this event is that they've really, I don't know, quadrupled, quintupled at least the prize money on offer, which had been pretty meager for mixed doubles in the past because it was really an afterthought event. But they're really trying to make it into a thing, and not without some controversy or debate. A lot of the doubles players are upset that they feel like their opportunity has been taken away from them. But I think there's no denying this is going to be a much more successful business product. A lot more people watching, a lot of people remembering who's going to win this event. And it'll be cool because at least they just put out a provisional list recently, and the defending champion team is an Italian pair of doubles specialists, Sara Errani and Andrea Vavasori. They are they did get given a spot in the draw. So we'll get to see sort of at least one, torchbearer for the sort of traditional double specialist types going up against these singles talents who may have better shots and better athleticism and bigger power, but don't have the sort of doubles acumen and tactical experience that this double specialist team will have. So that'll be cool as well to see how they fare. And yeah, I think it's going to bring a lot of excitement to the event. It's being put on really early before the main draw starts. It's on the Tuesday and Wednesday before the week before the US Open main draw starts, so pretty well out in advance, but it's going to be an interesting sort of curtain raiser type event for this event for the first time.
I wanted to ask you this question because I know you live in the D.C. area. The return of Venus Williams to tennis, were you able to take that in, and what was it like to see her out there again?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, she said she was coming back at 45 years old, which was a surprise. Honestly, she hadn't played in more than a year and was listed as, because she hadn't played in more than a year, she was listed as being inactive on her WTA profile. And I think a lot of people probably thought that she was just sort of, quietly stepping away from the game and sort of fading out from the sport. But she came back, and I think a lot of people honestly were nervous about how she would do. I mean, being 45 years old, her results in her last couple tournaments before she stepped away hadn't been great. But she came out in her first match in Washington against Peyton Stearns and was playing great and serving huge, serving 113 miles per hour and hitting a lot of big forehand winners down the line and definitely not moving. I mean, Venus was an ultimate sort of track star type player on court with this incredibly long stride and could cover every corner of the court in a second. She was not as fast obviously at 45, but still playing smart and figuring out ways to compensate for that and really took it to Stearns in that opening match. And Stearns, understandably, was really, I think, looked really nervous playing against Venus, and also maybe Venus, who she thought she should beat, who everyone kind of expected her to win that match. And so Venus was a big surprise package and delighted the fans. It was a great story and got a lot of traction. And it's really cool, really, really cool to have someone, if you haven't paid attention to tennis in 25 years, there's still a name you will recognize because Venus Williams was around at the top of the sport then, and that she's at all in the conversation anymore still competitively in 2025 it's pretty cool. So she's on that US Open mixed entry list as well, and maybe some singles I would imagine as well if she's staying healthy through the US Open. So it'd be pretty cool to see her out there at least one more time.
Ben Rothenberg, we'll get you out on this one. I was so taken back by Wimbledon this year when they had that row behind the Royals of all the past champions and some of the names, and as they just went down the list and you saw the faces, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Stan Smith and Andre Agassi and just the generations with Chris Evert, and I was just like, this is such a great tribute without making a big deal about it. Where would you say, and I know this is a broad question, where would you say tennis is right now? Is tennis in a good place on both the men's and women's side, or is one doing better than the other? But as far as the game goes, is it in good hands right now?
I think the storylines are probably clear on the men's side. At least it seems like, where we've had 7 straight now majors won by either Alcaraz or Sinner. Really does seem like a pretty clear recipient of the torch being passed from the big 3 to those 2 guys, and a lot of excitement and people locking into that rivalry already. There's already a friend who already wrote a book about that rivalry. I mean, it really is already getting some traction there. Gary Nathan changeover, it's coming out right before the US Open, so he's done incredibly lucky that he started writing this book and they've kept living up to the hype and the interest in them. I mean, they really have delivered that rivalry. So that's been really impressive. And then, the women's side has been more mixed, but I think there definitely are names who've gotten traction. Coco Gauff is a bona fide star for sure, and her win in Paris was a big deal. And the sort of victory tour she had coming back to New York after she won was really, really A-list type stuff. And so that was pretty cool for the sport to have that. Iga Swiatek is a huge star in Poland, especially. I mean, best tennis player in Polish history. Poland's not a small country, and that's she's meant a lot to them. And her Wimbledon win, I think, really reinvigorated and reconsolidated her status in Poland after maybe a disappointing year or 2 by her standards. And so that's been big for the sport. And there's other people in the mix too. I think it's definitely personally, I like a bit of unpredictability in sports. I like going to the U.S. Open not knowing who's going to win any given day, and the women's tennis has provided that. It can be tougher, sort of for casual fans who maybe don't recognize a name in a semifinal or even a final sometimes. But I do think that tuning in and not knowing what you're going to get is a big part of sports, and I think women's tennis has had that in the last few years, and now it's also getting a mix of these more reliable main characters as well. So I think they're both in a good place. Tennis is, for the organizers and powers that be, it's tricky because you don't get to pick who wins and loses. You don't get to choose the storylines and get to write a script that way. So that's tricky for telling the story of the sport or hoping for it. But I think there's a lot of good characters and good settings and stakes in place for a pretty exciting plot at the U.S. Open this year.
Ben Rothenberg, we appreciate you joining us on This Sporting Planet. We look forward to reading your work.
Thank you.